Hey there, and welcome back to the Nerd Culture Ministry Underground podcast. My name is Bubba Stalkup, CEO, president, and founder of an organization called Love Thy Nerd that exists to be the love of Jesus to nerds and nerd culture. And today I am joined by my good friend, Chris Skaggs, and we are here on the NCMU podcast specifically to help raise up and empower the next generation of nerd culture ministers and missionaries. And Chris, I can't think of anybody better to help me do that this episode than you. So before we get started, before we get too far into it, right? Yeah, that's kind of, I built you up pretty big there, didn't I? I guess sorry, not sorry. We'll see how it goes. But I've known Chris for a while. And Chris, can you just give us kind of a brief introduction to who you are, period, like just as on a personal level? Who is Chris Skaggs? And then we'll get into the other stuff that you're here with Soma Games and Imladris and all that cool stuff. Sure. But who's Chris Skaggs as a human person on planet Earth?
Okay, so we're just going right there. Okay, so Chris, current status, right? I live up in wine country of Oregon, which, as far as I can tell, really is God's country. So all you people from Montana and Colorado,
none taken. All right, I got you.
You're just like, so as far as I can tell, this is the deal. At least it's God's country for me. I'm married. I'm on my my bride is Samantha, and we have 3 kids together. So a stepdaughter is Savannah. In fact, congratulations, Savannah. She's getting married here in just a couple weeks, and we're really excited for that. Yeah, thank you very much. She's out in Michigan. And then I got 2 younger kids. My son, Odin, just graduated from high school, and my daughter, Athena, who's a sophomore in high school. So I got kind of like did not grow up a believer. That wasn't my story. I wound up getting saved when I was in the military. So I was in the Navy and read a bunch of C.S. Lewis books, went there. And then from there was this kind of steady progression of where kind of my life would just take another, like I just level up. So, a little bit after I got out of the military, I came to George Fox University, which is like 300 yards from here down the road. And that was my first real experience with whatever you might call spiritual formation, but it was so good for me. And I learned a ton, and I was excited to find that smart people could be believers too. Like you didn't have to be a goofball. You didn't have to be a doofus. And that was kind of a new idea for me. A big, huge, another pivot in my life was when I read Wild at Heart by John Eldredge. And that particularly, I think the thing that was so formative, there's one line in there where he says that you can be dangerous for good. And that one, he was just saying it still like it zings me, like, oh, there's work to do here, man. And I loved that. And that led to there's a whole relationship that we still have with John and his team at Wild at Heart. Like that's been a huge, huge thing. And then right around the time that got involved, I felt like God very kind of, for me, it was a very supernatural experience. It was like, you're going to go make video games. And I've always thought that was a dumb idea. But here it is. And
yeah, hey, might still be. Jury's still out on it, like
it could be. But I think the story of Soma, like if everyone is like, hey, I want to do what you did, I want to follow in your footsteps. I'm like, yeah, that's a bad idea. I think quite literally, and this is probably by design, our path has been so unexpected. There was no plan. It wasn't like we set out a business plan and went to do it. Like it has always been characterized by these pivotal moments that we could never saw coming. And you got to follow a wild goose. And so something shows up on your desk. You're like, well, that's God's call right now. And it's not at all what we were expecting, but we got to go down that road. So where we are now is Soma Games, sort of like on paper, started in 2005. Our first game was on the iPhone in 2009, and we've just been making games ever since then. Kind of every platform you can think of. Some of us also work for hire, so we'll do work for other people. And then more recently, 2021 was where we started Imladris, which kind of in some ways was sort of a spiritual spin-off from the Christian Game Developers Conference, but a little bit more focused towards the professional end than the seeker-sensitive end, if you'll allow for that. And now Imladris is been growing as a community, as an outreach. We're doing some scholarship, and it's more of a professional organization than a ministry, but it's kind of a fuzzy line. So I think that's who the answer is.
It's pretty concise. It's almost like you've done this before and had to,
a couple times
catch people up. Well, hey, let's back up a little bit and kind of talk about that. So you mentioned Soma Games, right?
Yep.
And for people who are unfamiliar with your work and your studio, kind of talk about that. Like, how did you guys get into that when, God said you're going to make video games, and you said that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard, and now here you are. And again, we'll talk about Imladris in just a second, but kind of bringing other, Christian game developers and game developers in the space who find themselves as Christians, just moving in a certain direction. Like, how did you go from no to yes to all of that? Like, what's the story there?
Yeah. The actual story is long and circuitous, but if you want to read it, it's on our website. But okay,
this is going to be a 7-part series. Yeah, we'll dive in.
It's quite a story. But at the heart of it was this was right around the time. In fact, it was exactly at the time when Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was in the news, and there was this pornographic scene in the game, and Hillary Clinton got involved, and Congress was voting. It was a huge thing. And it was called the Hot Coffee
I was working at EB Games at that time. It was the only, it was the first ever AO video game. That wasn't AO when it was released. AO stands for adult only. Yeah.
Adult only. So it's like the X-rated game. And it was such a huge kerfuffle. And I'm just sort of watching this. So at the time we have a web design company. So we're doing websites and e-commerce and that jazz. But I'm seeing this in the news, and there's this little sidebar that's like, hey, if you don't want to play games about beating up hookers and stealing cars, then you could maybe go to the Christian Game Conference. And it just so happens it's like that weekend in my hometown. And I'm like, that's bonkers. That shouldn't be a thing. And so kind of this whole story unfolds out of there. Like a couple days later, I'm on TV in Boston, sort of representing like all of Christendom in gaming, right? So it was a whole crazy story. But what was really interesting is how clear it was that God's like, oh, no, I'm not done here. Like he just got thing after thing after thing, open door after open door. It was this huge providential thing where at the end of that, if you conclude anything other than God made that happen and you were just along for the ride, then you were not paying attention. So it was so crystal clear at that moment, like, I guess we're making games. Like I would be in trouble not to. And then years pass, right? So you think about like, we always think that God's next step is going to be tomorrow. And we should know from the biblical story, like that's just not likely, So for me in particular, coming home from that interview, I was like, we're ready to start, man. But the truth is I didn't know anything about gaming. I didn't know literally anything at all a week before. I had so much homework to do, so much to learn, figure out even the basics of, I don't even know how to make any business plan, much less one for a game company. So I had a lot of learning to do. And it was just homework time for years. And back then, 2005 was basically you could make an Xbox game or you could make a PC game for Sierra. There really wasn't anything else. What really changed in that, and that means that gets a lot of money. Like, and I don't have $1 million and no one's going to give me $1 million. What changed was the iPhone. And all of a sudden you could make a game for 10 grand, right? That was a realistic thing. And so like, we give it a shot, man. This is a whole new thing. Let's make our first game. And of course, since we were already in web, which means we're computers and software, we're like, how hard? I had no idea what we're getting into. And for anyone who's made a game, it's really hard. Right? It is really, really hard. But that game was like, we really leaned into the artistic side. It was a funny thing. It's like, that was our very first game. And it's based in a story that's like, what if Noah's Ark, like the most well-known story in the whole world, what if that story could be made unrecognizable by putting it in space and in steampunk? And the game starts with this idea, like we're just discovering that the flood is coming. And the game that's the backdrop to the story. And that really set a tone for all of us for up until today, which is, I'm not really making Bible games in the sense like there's no Noah's Ark, or I should say, there's no David and Goliath stories and that kind of stuff, but it's always there in the background. So in this case, like Noah is there. It's just instead of an old guy with a beard and animals, it's literally a secret society named Noah, NOAA, who is trying to like keep all of the genetic material of the planet alive. So we just sort of disguise it, and it's remarkable how much people don't notice until the last minute. And so we started with that game, and that's always been our jam. It's always been that kind of the allegorical, the worldview stuff. And that put us in a place that frankly was pretty uncommon. The idea, like, we were going to be very open Christian on our website, on our stuff. Like, this is who we are as people, but all the material should be for the mainstream. Like, I don't want there to ever be that. We had plenty of well-meaning advisors at the beginning who were like, yeah, you can't do that. Like, you got to choose. You either got to be Christian products for Christian consumers, or you can't mention that. And we're like, that's the plan. And it's actually turned out really great for us. And so what's been interesting is over the years, how often I get approached at like GDC or PAX or something like this. And someone comes up and they're like, Psst, I'm a Christian too. And I'm like, why are you whispering?
They show you the tattoo. Yeah, it's a whole thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what Soma Games has always been doing. And so we've been pretty prolific. I think that we've 400 games. Now that includes a lot of little things for other people, but that includes our own stuff on our own website. Lots of work for hire. We've had a chance to work with some really fun properties. Redwall was the biggest. So the Redwall IP, literally a guy called us and says, "Hey, I hear you make video games. Can you help me?" And at the time, I'd never heard of Redwall. And I'm like, I don't know, like talking mice with swords, I guess. We'll do something. But that kind of providential thing has been the whole story of Soma to today.
That's crazy, man. And I remember with Love Thy Nerd, Chris and I played Redwall, that right first game, and played it with a couple of people from your team, from the Redwall team, and it was kind of a surreal thing because we were playing a game that was Christian in theme and in overtones and undertones, right? But it wasn't a Christian game. We were literally taking a talking mouse, with a sword around a cave, and taking them on quests and finding things and all sorts of stuff. And it was refreshing. It's not new. This is not a new concept, but it doesn't mean that it wasn't refreshing. It's the same basic concept, and this is probably a good lead into the next thing we'll talk about here. But same basic concept as like reading The Lord of the Rings or watching the movies or experiencing something from that, where it's like it's really hard for me not to see the spirituality, the Christianity in this. But even Tolkien himself said, this is not what it's for. This is 100% not what it's for. But dang it if we can't like see it in everything that you do, right? Like, and so now we fast forward a little bit. Soma still exists. You guys are still doing games. You're still, cranking stuff out. Still, helping people, and you're an ancillary, project manager for a lot of different things. But at the same time, now you've got Imladris, right? Which is a word from the Tolkien universe.
Yes.
And so let's talk about that for a little bit, because the reason I want to kind of hone in on that is that kind of speaks a lot to what we're doing here with the Nerd Culture Ministry Collective, where we're trying to bring a lot of people from a lot of different areas into a common space to then do the thing that God is calling them to do in and through that space that may be difficult or seemingly impossible or irrelevant for people who don't understand it. So that's the setup for Imladris, as if you needed one. What are we talking? What does the word mean, and what does it consist of in your realm?
So the story for Imladris says that as we were just coming out of the Rona, so like people were starting to like walk around and come together again, and I felt like God really clearly said, "Hey, Chris, what if you were the king of the games industry? What would you do?" And for what it's worth, like that's kind of how it works for me and God. Like I get these weird little bits, but the question was phrased in such a way that made me really pause. And I'm like, that's just a weird question. And how do I think about this? And everything about it's like, so it's not a company, it's not a ministry, it's a kingdom. Like, what does that even mean? So I really started chewing on this thing of how do you even approach that question? And kingdoms are characterized by laws. They're characterized by cultures. They have, they have origin stories. They have imports and exports and friends and enemies. And so it's just a whole different kind of KPI. But long story short, as I'm chewing on this, I wind up inviting about a dozen friends, just people I'd met over the decades who are also Christians in the game space. I'm like, there's this idea on our hearts. You want to come out to Oregon and we'll just discuss it. And that was the very first Imladris. So the word Imladris is the Elvish word for Rivendell. And so you can see that in when they talk about like where is Narsil hidden, it's within Imladris lies. Anyways, so it's an Elvish word, which is ultimate nerddom, right? Like so nerdy it makes people squeal. And we've really leaned into this whole Lord of the Rings. You see like the sword back here, so that's Aragorn's sword, and so I'm like very much into that thing. And Tolkien, when I look back on it, when I was probably in high school, maybe middle school, I remember reading that and having the first thing that Lewis calls the numinous, which is I felt homesick for a place that I had never been. And there was something about the Shire and Middle-earth that I was like, ooh, it just gets me. And I think back at that now because I pondered on that for a long time. And I think in some way, Lord of the Rings captured something about heaven. Like it's a place that I just couldn't, that I'd never been, but need to get to. It's like home, even that I've never seen. So that's always been in the back of my mind. And years ago, like going back 20, 30 years ago, I felt like I had this idea for a place where kings and queens of the earth and like corporate leaders and this kind of stuff, could we just get together in a place of where you put aside all of that stuff? You can just listen to the Spirit of God. Like if that could exist, that feels like what Rivendell always was, right? You've got the Lords of Gondor sitting next to the gardener at Bag End, and they're just hanging out and having toast and jam. Like it's all about something so much bigger than you, no matter how big you are. And I love that idea. And so when this event started coming around, I was like, let's lean into that notion of hospitality and, and feasting. And there's always a little bit something to do, but it's never up in your face. So that first event was also funny. So there's so many stories to tell. Barlow Girl came out and came out of retirement literally for our event. This small
really?
thing. It was so much fun. And there's a great story there. I met them back in 2011 and just stayed in touch with their dad. And totally out of the blue, as this was coming, I was, hey, Vince, like any chance you guys want to come out and just play for this event like you did back in 2011? And it's like, it's funny you should say that. And there's a whole fun story there. But yeah, and so that was awesome. And it's one of the people there, Dawn Marie Neat, that was her birthday. She's like, Barlow Girl sang for my birthday. So she's having a great fit. It was so much fun.
That is wild.
And it's the kind of stuff where like God just moves around the pieces in ways where you're like, that's just all blessing, So we came out of that first thing with kind of a core idea of like, this is a pivotal moment for all of gaming. For a long time, people have been aware of this notion that gaming is becoming, and by some measures already is, the dominant cultural medium, right? So like movies coming down, and not that they're ever going away, but like gaming is on the rise, just in terms of money and business and jobs, like it's all there. So with that in mind, we're like, what if that's true, especially with the COVID, put all this extra energy into the game space when people can't go anywhere. You got to play games because you can't go to a concert, you can't go to a football game. So like, let's actually think about what would it be like to imagine the gaming industry from a kingdom of God up perspective and see what we can think of. And so it became very much sort of a think tank, kind of a thing. But boy, did it catch fire. And next year, 12 became 50. And pretty soon I'm getting letters from people who I've never met who are like, what's that Elvish thing you're doing? And how do I get invited? And last year, so I should say 3 months ago, we packed the house, like we filled the resort, and now we got to figure out if we're going to move on. And, the mailing list went from like 50 to 1,000. And all of a sudden we're realizing there's so many game developers who are Christians, like at every studio you can think of. So I remember one of my favorite stories is getting a letter from a guy. I'm the only Christian at Activision. And later that week, I'm the only Christian at Activision. It turns out these cats work in the same building. But there's no culture of awareness in most game studios. And so the overwhelming sense is I need to keep my mouth shut. I can never say anything remotely Christian. And so I think I'm alone, even though literally the guy next to me is a Christian too. So I think just that one central comment that, I mean, literally, like demographically, there should be at least 30 to 60% of the population should be at least nominal Christians, but they don't know each other. And so that became the kind of core message of Imladris was community and hospitality. Because I think the other huge awareness thing we found was there's a lot of people who gave their heart and soul thinking that they felt that God called them to make games, but then they're profoundly wounded because the church most often says, I don't even know what to do with you. Like, games might be from the devil. So that's bad. So they're getting heat over here, but also in their workplace, you do great work, but you can't ever mention your faith. And so it's this horrible grinding thing. So many of these people are just really hurt, but they're powering on. I mean, these are soldiers for the Lord, man. But they're wounded. So there's got to be a ministry out there just for game developers who have lost their marriage, who have lost their mind, who have lost their story, because it is a hard business. And I think that's where Imladris is. So now, like I said, we just had our fourth conference. It was a huge success, and we're looking to grow. I think that now, and this is where I would love where I met you, Bubba. Jamie Harris from Satellite Gaming totally, literally crashed our party. I don't even know how he showed up. Just one day because it turns out he's really just down the road from us. But he showed up, and I'm like, I'm glad you're here. Who are you? And it turns out that I'd sent a letter to somebody, like an invite to somebody who forwarded. Eventually gets back to Jamie, and it's like, did you know this is in your backyard? He's like, no, I'm driving over there. So he just did. He just drives up the road, and there we are. And all of a sudden, I had this huge awareness. Like, I've been focusing so much on the community of game developers. I had not even really thought about the game players, which is such a bonehead move. But Jamie was my first entrance into everything you're doing, everything. I mean, we knew Love Thy Nerd before. It's not that we never met you. It's just I hadn't thought about it. I hadn't thought about what the relationship was. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how come I never thought about the interaction between the people and the players? Like, this is a joint effort, man. So I got very, very excited about how we could start just being more aware of each other, collaborating in whatever way that looks like. And look, here we are.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think back to, the first letter that we got about an invite to Imladris. And my initial thoughts were, it's not for us. I mean, we're not developing anything. And literally I'm sitting here thinking, man, what do we add to this space at all? But again, it's this, egocentric in the most negative and opposite way possible of, not, they can't do it without me, but what would they do with me? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. Right. And so the more that we've gotten to know each other and the more circles that we find ourselves in, just for all of our viewers and listeners, like Chris and I were probably in 4 different conversations in 4 different groups across, all of nerddom, which always blows my mind when I'm in a room with people who are meeting for the first time and I look across and I see friends and I'm like, oh, I know that guy. It's the same thing you were talking about. I'm the only Christian at Activision. It's like, but I don't think that that's true. It can't be true. And I can prove it to you because I know that person. Like that's my friend right there. And so, I think it's really great. And, you were talking about the CGDC, the Christian Game Developer Conference, and kind of how Imladris is not a replacement for that. And I don't think that it ever will be, right? I do think that there's a lot of overlap in your Venn diagrams, but at the end of the day, the purposes between the two are separate enough that it causes overlap, right? But that the whole purpose of them are completely separate. So whereas CGDC is about, hey, let's get together and let's learn about the games that you're playing, or that you're creating, rather, maybe some that you're playing, but that you're creating. Let's create cohorts. Let's see if we can find work between the two, like that kind of a stuff. That's more on the business side of things with a good helping of spirituality. I mean, Brock's doing a great job over there with the things that they're doing. But then Imladris seems to be focusing more on fellowship and spiritual acts, and that kind of things. And so if you can kind of speak just to a little bit of what is Imladris doing in those spaces? What are you doing with people whose marriages have failed or are failing? What are you doing with people who are being ousted from the industry? Possibly, this is not this doesn't happen in every case, but people that may be ousted from the industry due to their faith and how they maybe hold themselves in certain situations and different ideals that they hold to. Like, what is Imladris doing to kind of step in the gap for those people?
Yeah, so I think the very first step, especially for someone who's in the middle of a hard season, right, is even just knowing that someone will sit with you in the middle of your struggle can be a game changer. And I think I don't want to oversimplify this, but I think there's a general tendency in probably nerddom where like that's just not the first thing we try. We think of like, I'm hurting, I'm going to go talk to my friends. It's just not usually the first place we go. And so being able to know, but here's a safe place where people understand, they understand me, they accept me, and I can talk about like, I don't know where God is, right? Think about the very first details. Where's God? I'm fired, right? This kind of thing. Like, where do you go with this? That became sort of like entry level one, and I think also that same thing. It seems so simple, but I met the guy. Well, for the moment, I'll just not drop his name, but a guy who's very high up in Amazon gaming, and I met him about a year ago, and he sees me. All of a sudden, he's like, "Now I know one Christian in all of gaming." I'm like, "Dude, like, there's thousands. I'm going to meet and invite you to a thousand."
Yeah, have we got a show for you?
Yeah, yeah. And he was like so moved by this idea, like, I'm not even close to alone. And then here's what happened next. Is like he was in the middle of a transition because so he went from Amazon to a new job, but now he's like the leader of a major project. So this game is set in an America which is in about 50 years, and you can start asking the questions like, in that game, are there any churches at all anywhere, in any map, in any street, in anywhere? You know, the notion is like, no, well, there's not, because we just had never considered that. Like, we're thinking dystopia, we're thinking, you know, all the kind of weird things. And that's got about like, you know, porn shops and, you know, and broken down plague victims, this kind of stuff. I'm like, but the truth is, like, from a worldview, what's the presentation you're doing? Nobody can really imagine the United States in 50 years that doesn't have churches, because they are everywhere right now. Like, there's no way they could all be torn down, even if you started today. And so just that thought of like, I never considered that, which is the same thing as like, are there any Christians in your game at all? And I don't even mean that they're like lead characters. I don't mean that, but I mean, like, do they even exist? Because there's no way to imagine America that doesn't have some Christians. And that kind of thing starts to think much, much deeper. So Imladris now is no longer, it's like CGC is a good entry level, you know, like, let's see if you want to make games for a living. Somewhere in there, we usually encourage people like, now go to college, like learn how to do this. Yeah. But once you've learned how to do it, now it's like, now what do you do? And Imladris is there to say like, how is the worldview that you say is important to you? How is that even reflected in your work? And how do you do that well? How do you not like beat people over the head, you know, with the gospel? Like, how do you do it like cleverly? And so that's, you know, that's the conversation we get to have with Dan and lots of others. And now here's a community that can think about that together. And it's collaborative and it's sharing and ideas can bounce off each other. So that's way up here. But also, hey, I just lost my job. Does anyone looking for a Unity developer? And like, yep, I got over here. In fact, the same guy, I was like, you know, all these people got laid off in the last year. He's got tons of jobs available. So this kind of like actual healthy ecosystem is what Imladris hopes to be a part of.
That's awesome, man. I mean, like I've been finding myself in some of these situations where I'm having conversations with people I never would have thought that I would. That's the story of my life. Is I'm in conversations with people. I'm like, I don't have any business talking to this person at all. You know, and I honestly remember thinking that the first time I talked with you, I was like, what the heck am I talking with Chris Skaggs about? What does he want with me? What did I do? And so, but seeing kind of how we work together and the people that God puts in front of us in order to be able to more often than not put in front of other people, right? It's never just like a completely insulary thing. It's how do we pay it forward? How do we spread the fellowship, right? And how do we bring people into Imladris, the Imladris of everything around us, of Christendom? And, you know, I was actually speaking with a guy, he runs an animation studio called Brainy Pixel. And it's very similar to the Imladris, you know, that you're talking about, but in the animation side of things. And so I was literally just talking with him, and then I was the next month, somebody who does not know him contacts me and says, hey, I have this person who's been laid off from Blizzard. and has worked with all of these major people in the industry, and is being ousted, because of his Christendom. Do you know anybody he could talk to? And I was like, yeah, yes. And the things that he had done was not like game development. It was very specifically animation and design. And I was like, oh my gosh, I do. I know the perfect person to put him in contact with.
Nice.
You back up 1 month and 1 day before that. And I'm like, I don't know, man. I'll put some feelers out and see what I can do for you. Yeah. But God's like moving in and through all of these things to create these connections between people that honestly, I, again, never would have ever thought possible. But a guy that I hadn't talked to in probably a year sends me a message within a month of meeting somebody who's the perfect person for that guy to talk to. And it's like, you can't make that stuff up, like it just writes itself after a while.
Let me encourage you on this. Is like, so often I think the things in the Bible that we make a mistake if we think that whoever it is, pick, like it's Isaiah, it's Jonah, it's Peter, whatever. We think that somehow these guys are like spiritual Navy SEALs, like they're elite, and it's never that. It's always just the guy who said yes. And you think about, there's like, Peter's a great example. It's like Jesus had to kind of talk him into it. Like, hey, I'm a sinful man. Get away from me. This is a bad idea. Moses is like, nope, you got the wrong guy. And it's actually like the story of those people is often just who's willing to say, here I am, send me. And so certainly that's part of my story. Like I don't think that I certainly did not plan for this. I wasn't looking for it. It sounds like it's yours. So I just encourage you, like, keep saying yes. And then what happens also in that is then everything that God does is not you. And it is clear to everyone, like, yeah, Bubba didn't do that.
It should be clear to everybody. Bubba didn't do that. But it's one of those things where, like, you're a little bit longer in the tooth than I am. And so you've been around a little bit longer than I have. But I've come to understand that, like, God is not super interested in the things that I can do. He's interested in the things that I can do, like, with him and for him and him through me, right? Like that's what he's interested in. And so I personally I've said yes to so many things, everything that I'm absolutely able to. I just said yes to another thing this past week that's like, hey, can you come out and speak at our men's retreat? And I'm like, oh, I've never done a men's retreat before. I would love to do that. Absolutely. Let's get out there and do it, right? Like, how can I put the things that we're doing in front of people that would not normally see them? How can I change preconceived notions that people have, like in the church world with nerd culture, right? Like how can I change those thoughts and the processes and basically, like, rewire the synapses that fire when they think about Magic the Gathering or video games or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever? How can I put in somebody's brain a way that they can see somebody in their life that was radically transformed for the good in that thing? And so it's been a wild ride, and we're not even neither of us are even close to being done yet, right? Like the story that you were telling about, San Andreas, Grand Theft Auto, like, that feels so long ago. It was not that long at all ago, and we have just gone to the moon and back since then, in the world of video games and development, and everything was being coded, and it was so difficult, like you were talking about. And now everything's at your fingertips with, like, Unreal Engine 5 and stuff like that. Like, you go on YouTube and watch somebody make a video game, right? It just the landscape is completely changing. And the thing that I think is the most important, and this is why I love M. Lodgerson, specifically what you guys are doing over there, is you're not just saying, well, it's too accessible. We can't hold on to it. We're losing our grip. Everything's slippy, right? It's saying, okay, well, what can we do with a growing space? And who can we partner with, right? You've got games like Gate Zero that are coming out that is just like like in your face Christian, right? But at the same time, it's like, man, how can we come alongside of that and bolster it so that it doesn't go sour, so that it doesn't put a nasty taste in somebody's mouth about Christianity? And it's not that everybody speaks at a high level into every game. That's not what this group is. But it's to come alongside and say, hey, have you thought about? Hey, I was praying about. Hey, this is what we're doing on our side. Here's what God's doing in the lives of the people around me. Like, it's that unity it's that fellowship, right? That kind of helps us get to the next level. And so I was wondering, is there something that's on the horizon for Imladris that you're excited about, that literally anybody from any reach of the globe could be a part of, whether they're a pastor in a church who doesn't know jack or squat about video games, or they're a junior in high school that's like, man, I'm sick and tired of people not making the game that I think needs to be made, and then the person who's smack dab in the middle of a AAA campaign right now, that may be on the brink of coming out or on the brink of shutting down. What would you say to those people to help get them into the community, to get them excited about where Imladris is going?
So it's a great question, and thank you. I think that something that we presented just in June is kind of our vision of where Imladris fits in a bigger ecosystem. And we're only one piece of the puzzle. So the way that we see it, and frankly, I think we've developed a very beautiful graphic for this. We've got people who really start with you, Bubba, who start with Love Thy Nerd, who start with the players and the streamers and the Twitchers, who start with like, the first thing that has to happen is Christian kids need to know that there's not a fundamental conflict between their faith and their play. And that has often been the subtle message. Like I remember teaching a youth group once, and I started with like, who here plays Halo? And nobody raised their hand. But in about 10 minutes, I'm telling my story, and later I'm like, I remember that thing where Master Chief has to save Cortana and how moving that is. Like, oh, that was a great scene. I'm like, suckers, I caught you. You all play Halo. And they all knew it, but there's this weirdness that has been in the church, and that's got to go away. That absolutely has to go away. And I think that really starts, like, you are so tip of the spear on that. People are like, this is okay. Like, this is a cool thing. Players become, I mean this in the best possible way, critics. They become educated consumers. They know what's good. They know what's bad. They know what they like and why. Like, those people become sort of the folks who help spread the word, like, this is worth playing, this isn't. And so the culture of gamers who post reviews and make videos and do Let's Play, like, you have no idea the power that you have. And so I'll give you an example. I was talking with Zach Miller, is in a Steam launch, for example, until I get 10 reviews, it doesn't matter if they're positive or negative. Until I get 10 reviews, my game will not show up in any of the organic searches. And on the one hand, it's remarkable how reluctant a player is to give a review. Like, it's so hard to get, I mean, thumbs up, you're done. It takes you 3 seconds. But I really want to start with the empowering of, like, especially people who have a dog in this fight, and you do. It's like, if you find the product, don't be the guy who's like, well, it's not the best game I've ever played, so I can't give it a thumbs up. But I don't want to be a jerk, so I can't give it a thumbs down. There's this weird conversation about how reviews happen. But for the players, or rather for the makers, that is so powerful. And so when a new game comes out, just to be aware of it and to know that these players actually really have a lot of power to make or break whether this thing goes forward or not. Really want to empower your audience to do that, so that they know it matters. Some of those players, some of those reviewers, those streamers, those Twitchers, some of them are going to ask, I wonder if I can make a game. Like, I wonder if this is an industry that I'd like to get into. And that's where CGDC, I think, is the perfect, I like to call it kind of a public high school. There's like no expectations and no barrier to entry. Just go in there and have fun, and you meet people. Some people are working on Bible games. Some people are working on crazy games. Some people are making board games. Like, it's such a great community of all over. But it's, like I said, kind of seeker sensitive. This notion, like, this may be the first time you ever knew that Christians made games at all. That was certainly my experience. CGDC, and like, I'm on the board of that, so I can say this with some authority. Like, we want that whole thing to slope towards education. Like, some of those CGDC people can be like, yeah, I think I want to do this. And the next step for you is to get the skills, right? Go to college, go to trade school somehow, but learn the skills. And that's where we started partnering with Biola and Azusa Pacific and Trinity Western. Like, there's more and more schools coming on board. Grand Canyon University just started one, Houston Baptist. There's actually like more and more Christian schools, but also great schools at secular universities that have who are either leading the program or part of it. So there's lots of options to learn the craft, and there's a community growing there. Once you have a job, that's where Mlodress comes in. Now it's a professional community, and we talk about like how do you continue in your craft, but more importantly, you probably don't need help with how to learn a shader. Frankly, you can get much better training at GDC. But what you probably don't know how to do is how do you take care of your soul? How do you take care of that part of you that stays connected to the vine in an industry that, at least perceptually, doesn't want you? So Mlodress is there for like nurturing people over their career, helping with jobs, helping with placement, helping with capital. So as we grow, we're trying to fill in more and more of that ecosystem. I think one of the biggest opportunities for all of, frankly, anybody right now is there's basically nobody teaching the best practices of the video game business. I think I found one school at Carnegie Mellon, maybe I just found, but by and large, no one even knows what best practices are. So there's the business side, there's the marketing side, there's the publishing side. I think that Mlodress right now has done a good job of getting developers, but there's a gap here on like, okay, the practical financing, legal, marketing, all that stuff's got to happen too. And then the last step is now as you're longer in the tooth like me, pretty soon, sometimes these people back here at Love Thy Nerd, what they really want is they just want a mentor. They want someone to be like you can do it, right? Sometimes that's all someone needs is like that confidence. Like I just was on university, and ultimately he's wrestling with this question of like, do I want to get into this business? And he just needed an ear. He needed the voice of someone who had been in the business, who could kind of point out landmines, point out opportunities. And I think he came away with that really encouraged, like, oh, this is a path that I can do. And I think when we see this whole thing as an ecosystem, then Bubba, you and me, we're on the same train, man. We're just in different cars. And this is a whole different, we could talk all day about this, but I feel like one of the core notions that I wish was more in the church was this idea of progress, that the day you get saved is the day you start. And then you should be growing. And honestly, I wish there were churches that were kind of like schools where it's like, there's the high school church, there's the college church, there's the post-grad church. Like you should imagine people maturing and growing and kind of graduating, so to speak. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. So the same idea, like there's a continuity here that I'm a very big fan of. And I think that right now is, you asked like, what's the big thing coming? Drawing together the full scope and trying to be as collaborative as possible with not just people inside the game industry, but also at universities, at ministries. So at NCMS here in November, we're going to have a little sidebar thing for ministries in the area who just want to engage with the game industry, who have no idea what they're talking about. And so these are the big kind of parachurch ministries, focus on the family, crew, young life, this kind of stuff. Who's like, maybe they don't know quite where they fit, but let's bring to the table and let's see what you want to talk about. And I love that kind of like diplomatic work because I think it's super needed right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important and it's so poignant, right? To be able to do it right now at this time, and the whole strike while the iron's hot mentality. We could wait. We could wait until we have the perfect way to do something. But it's the same thing, that you would say to somebody if they were, waiting to have kids or something like that. Like if you wait till you're ready, you'll never have them. That's just not how it happens. You'll always, at least in this industry and in other industries too, if you wait to make the perfect space game, you'll just be making a copy of somebody else's space game that has come out before it. And so, what we're trying to do is create these spaces through things like, you did my ad for me through NCMS. Make sure that you're there. ncmsummit.com. We're doing an Mlodress meetup and roundtable where we're just, it's not a main stage. It's not there's specific things we're talking about. It's just, hey, you're going to get to sit down and talk with people who are interested, making games, in that industry, whatever, and just learn and talk and have an actual conversation with Chris Skaggs and people just like that. And I think that honestly, in a lot of spaces that I've been in, that's usually more beneficial. I'm more likely to remember something that somebody said to me than something that somebody said about somebody else, right? So like main stage thing, somebody's talking down to you kind of a deal, like rather than somebody sitting across a table, which we know is a lot more intimate. And so I want to encourage anybody, even if you're going to be there at NCMS and you have no idea what it is you're going to do while you're there, if you're at all interested in the gaming industry and how your Christianity fits into that, or how it could fit into it, right? That's kind of a space that you're going to want to be at. And we're doing that in November, and I promise you want to be there. If you haven't signed up already, do yourself a favor. We are running out of rooms. Oh boy, we're running out of rooms. I think last I checked, who even knows by the time this airs, we have 2 rooms left in the castle. And so,
wow.
Hope you like the Holiday Inn if you haven't signed up by then. So there'll still be space at the convention, at the summit for you. But as far as staying in the castle, it might be a little bit different. All right. Sponsors paid, things over. Hey, Chris, we got to wrap up here, man. But people are going to want to talk to you more. They're going to want to,
Sure.
have conversations and understand kind of what Lodgers actually is from the inside, not just conceptually, but how do they experience it? So what are the best ways to get involved in Lodgers?
Sure. So 2 places I would start. One is Soma, so SOMA, and there you can see like the info, my email, that kind of stuff. So that's an easy way to reach me. Imladris is a, hopefully you'll have a link because it's in Elvish and hard to spell, but imladris.community.
We'll write it in English.
And, yeah. So that's just down, like step 1 is like, it also has a newsletter. We don't probably do that but once a quarter, but that always has an annual event. And pretty soon, if you sign up on the newsletter, you're going to get a couple emails and just kind of set the stage. This is what we're doing. And that is going to give you a link to the Discord server and then check in and see if these are the people you want to hang out with. We are increasingly doing more of these sidebar events. So like NCMS is one. We did one for educators in June. We're going to do another one for business people probably in April. And then on the big stage, I think that we're all going to Grand Rapids in July. I think you're part of that ultra mega nerd con with Realm Makers, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah.
That's like a dream come true to see that coming down the pipe.
Yeah, that's going to be fantastic. And you'll hear more about that with, through Love Thy Nerd and through NCMS whenever that goes, because that may be something that you want to be a part of in July, and it's going to be huge, massive.
Yeah.
And so keep your peepers peeled about that. A lot of people in this industry will be there. I promise you that. Well, hey, anything else that you want to leave our people with? Something that we didn't cover that you just thought was the bee's knees?
Yeah, sure. So I don't know when this will air, but September 11th is historically Noah's birthday, like the Noah with the ark and all that. And we
I did not know that.
Yeah, kind of a fun little story. So we just released our first demo for our upcoming game, and so that's called the Reluctant Redemption of Verity Lux. And depending on when this gets aired, either A, we'll still be in demo phase, or it should be live on Steam here coming up soon. But we would love your input. It's kind of ready for like what demo players and people who want to give us feedback. And that's our next release. And that all the way back to the very first release, which was G, Into the Rain. And it's the same world, the same Noah's Ark in space.
Sweet. Yeah, we'll have all the links to Soma and all the things that they're doing. And if you're looking for good games, games that you can play with your kids and not feel weird about, or let your kids play when you're not around that you don't feel weird about. That's a really good place to start. And then, like, legitimately speaking, they're not just children's games because they're Christian in theme. That, I believe, is just a misnomer that needs to be smashed with a big hammer as hard as we possibly can. Smash it. Some of the most crazy things that could be games are biblically themed. And I just wait until we find a way to actually truly get there. So my body's ready. Well, hey, Chris, thank you so much, man, for spending a little bit of time today. And if you want to see Chris, you want to come and talk to him, please make sure that you head on over to ncmsummit.com and register for the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit at Glen Eyrie in a castle in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
Well, that's going to do it here for us at the NCMU. If nobody else tells you this, just remember it's true. Jesus loves you, nerd.